The Audio Beacon, February 2022. Candlemas bells. The white of the snowdrop symbolises innocence and purity. Because it is the first flower to bloom at the end of winter and the beginning of spring, it also symbolises hope. Early calendar of English flowers. The snowdrop, in purest white array, first rears her head on Candlemas Day, while the crocus hastens to the shrine of Primrose Lone on St. Valentine. Then comes the daffodil beside Our Lady's smock at Our Lady Tide. About St. George, when blue is worn, the blue harebells the fields adorn. Anonymous. From The Flora. Either written by a town dweller, or there has been an even bigger climate change than we realise. Ministry Letter. February Filldyke. Whenever it rained or snowed in February, that's what pundits in my New Forest village would say to each other, wagging their heads wisely. It was only recently that I discovered the words to come from what is described in a Google search as an old country poem. If I'm honest, it isn't a very good poem, so I leave it to you to look it up for yourself, or not, as you choose. Don't bother, really. The brook at the bottom of the track we called the Bunny Run. No, I have no idea why. It was what the village had always called it, so that was its name, was reliably filled up during the winter, and equally reliably went dry during the summer, which was very frustrating when you wanted to paddle. But that was how things worked. Like the way the overhead power lines coming across the New Forest always failed in a thunderstorm, it was a perfectly acceptable reason for not having done your homework. I wonder what weather events this month will bring us. It's harder now, I think, to forecast with confidence according to the season, although the forecasts we are given are unimaginably accurate compared to those of my childhood. You listened at 8 a.m. and 1 p.m. and 6 p.m. It was an essential ritual, but you didn't really believe what you were hearing, and rightly so. And you can probably guess where I'm going here. This is, after all, a ministry team letter. It's always so lovely to have the community coming together, even in a socially distanced way in COVID times, for the Christmas services. And I love to see people wandering around our churchyards, trying to make out the wording on the gravestones, sitting on the benches, popping their heads round the church door, walking their dogs, or playing with their children and pausing for a chat. It was good to see you at Christmas. Do keep in touch during February Filldyke, March winds, April showers, May flowers, etc. The seasons vary, the weather is predictably unpredictable, but the church is always there. Jenny. Charisma. I used to wonder exactly what the word charismatic implied. Then, in the 90s, I was privileged to attend a seminar at York University. The leader for the weekend was Desmond Tutu. I could not explain it, but one knew that one was in the presence of someone extraordinary. One morning at 6:30 a.m, he led several hundred people out of the main hall, down the ramp, along the path and up a small hill, all singing Alleluia and dancing. One elderly gentleman next to me, very upright and using a stick which he waved, said, "If my PCC could see me now, they would never believe it." I replied that I thought mine would also doubt their eyes. Something one would not dream of doing in the village church, and yet so right when Desmond Tutu led it. I remember he thanked everyone for praying for South Africa, saying that it was prayer that brought change. One thing I think of every time I hear the parable of the lost sheep is him looking at us and saying, every time you hear this story, you have a picture in your minds of Jesus bearing a white, fluffy lamb. You are wrong. It was a great dirty smelly ram. He was truly someone special. By Penny Fletcher. Commemorations. We cannot fail to be aware these days that the 14th of February is St. Valentine's Day. Commerce does not allow it to pass unnoticed. There are several saints named Valentine, but little is known about the one with the romantic connections. He was a real person who died around 270 AD. It may be that our version is an amalgamation of two early Christians, and this uncertainty has caused the Roman Catholic Church to downgrade the status of the day. It is possible that the 14th was designated Valentine's feast day in an effort to Christianize the pagan celebration of Lupercalia, a pastoral festival of ancient Rome. The romantic association did not exist until one of Chaucer's poems gained attention. One February commemoration on firmer ground is that on the 27th of George Herbert, priest and poet. He was noted for unfailing care for his parishioners, bringing the sacraments to them when they were ill, and providing food and clothing for those in need. Henry Vaughan called him a most glorious saint and seer. Having married shortly before taking up his post, he and his wife gave a home to 3 orphaned nieces. Together with their servants, they crossed the lane for services in the small St. Andrew's Church twice every day. Twice a week, Herbert made the short journey into Salisbury to attend services at the cathedral, and afterwards would make music with the cathedral musicians. However, his time at Bemerton was short. Having suffered for most of his life from poor health, in 1633 Herbert died of consumption, only 3 years after taking holy orders. William Winterbourne Commemoration. Jenny started and closed the event, reminding us that this commemoration was so much about social justice, and she gave us thought-provoking quotes from the Old Testament and contemporary sources. Keith Jerome, trades union historian, reminded us about how the events developed, leaving Will, our own Will Curley, to give a very dramatic and heartfelt presentation of the events of 1830 to 31. Somehow, hearing the story unfold at the graveside was even more impactful than heard on Zoom last year. Tanya from Unite then gave a brilliant presentation contrasting those historic events with today's injustices. We then returned to hear Will tell the story of the sentencing and death of Winterbourne. Jeremy, Reading folk singer, sang his own ballad about William. Again, just listening to this at the graveside was very emotional, and Jeremy has such a strong baritone that it resonated around the churchyard. Report by the Museum of Rural Life. And there is a photograph of Keith Jerome relating the events of the swing riots and the cause. Services in February. Sunday 6th, Kintbury, Benefice service, 9:45 a.m. Sunday 13th, Enbourne, Matins, 9:45 a.m. Inkpen, Holy Communion, 9:45 a.m. Kintbury, Morning Prayer, 9:45 a.m. West Woody, Holy Communion, 11:15 a.m. Sunday 20th, Coombe, Holy Communion, 11:15 a.m. Inkpen, Compline, 4 p.m. Kintbury, Holy Communion, 9:45 a.m. Sunday 27th, Enbourne, Holy Communion, 9:45 a.m. Hampstead Marshall, Holy Communion, 9:45 a.m. Kintbury, Holy Communion, 8 a.m. Morning praise, 9:45 a.m. West Woody, Compline, 6 p.m. Services in the Benefice. The area dean and I are working hard to maintain as complete a service pattern as possible across the 6 churches of the Benefice during these months without a priest. Our minimum aim is to ensure that every church has at least one communion service during the month, and that there will always be a communion being celebrated for our parishioners somewhere at one of our churches every Sunday. However, please remember to check the Benefice weekly email, the Benefice website, and a church near you in case of late changes while we are dependent on visiting clergy during the vacancy. Jenny. We have received comments that the historical clips are appreciated. This month, Tessa writes about the Craven connection which influenced the whole area. The Craven connection. I shall not say why and how I became, at the age of 15, the mistress of the Earl of Craven. We are all very familiar with the name Craven around our benefice. In Kintbury we have Craven Close and Craven Way. In Inkpen there is Craven Road, and Enbourne has the Craven Arms. There is even a Craven Road in Newbury. But what do we really know about the eponymous Earls of Craven and their links to the villages that today make up our benefice? The history of the Craven family is very complex, but one of the first links with our area came in 1620 when Hampstead Park was bought for William, 1st Earl of Craven, by his widowed mother. This William was also responsible for building Ashdown House, near Lambourne, intending it to be for Elizabeth of Bohemia. Sadly, she died before it was completed. For the purpose of this article, however, I'm going to fast forward over 100 years to another William, 1st Earl of Craven of the second creation, who lived from 1770 to 1825. This William lived mostly at his Warwickshire seat of Combe Abbey, although he occasionally resided at others of his properties, including his house at Hampstead Marshall. Not surprisingly, Lord Craven was an influential landowner throughout Berkshire and held the patronage of many churches here and elsewhere, including Hampstead Marshall and Enbourne. In 1763, Reverend Thomas Fowle, then Vicar of Kintbury, had married Jane Craven, a cousin of William's father. Jane had grown up in Hampstead Marshall and was the daughter of Governor Craven. In 1771, Reverend Fowle became rector of Hampstead Marshall, whilst at the same time retaining the living at Kintbury, creating a link between the two parishes which predates our benefice by over 200 years. The Fowle family, it seems, were keen to mark this link with the ennobled branch of the family, as they named their firstborn son Fuller Craven Fowle. This was the young man who was later to inherit the living in Kintbury and to be the third generation of the Fowle family to live at the vicarage. In 1788, Fuller Craven Fowle married his cousin on his mother's side, Eliza Lloyd. She was the daughter of Noyes Lloyd, vicar of Enbourne, whose wife was Martha Craven, Jane Craven's sister. And so the Craven connection was carried into another generation, although it is difficult to imagine the families of either the Reverend Fowle or the Reverend Lloyd living anything like the elevated lifestyle of their cousin the Earl. By 1793, Britain was at war against the French, a conflict which spread beyond Europe to colonies in the New World. In 1795, General Sir Ralph Abercrombie prepared to lead a 19,000-strong expeditionary force to the West Indies, a campaign you might expect to be remote from our villages. However, the troops included the 3rd Regiment of Foot, whose colonelcy had recently been bought by Lord Craven himself. By this time, Thomas Fowle, the second son of Kintbury's Reverend Thomas Fowle, was himself ordained and rector of Allington in Wiltshire, a living he had received from his kinsman, Lord Craven. Tom had recently become engaged to Cassandra, daughter of family friend Reverend George Austin, although it is believed that the couple kept the engagement secret as they could not yet afford to marry. It is probable that Tom accepted the post of domestic chaplain to Craven's expedition in the hope of being appointed to one of his more valuable livings, which would enable him and Cassandra to marry. Abercrombie's expedition left Portsmouth in November 1795. Lord Craven was not on board Tom's ship, but followed in his yacht. The expedition was a disaster for the Fowle and Austin families. Cassandra was never to see her fiancé again, as Tom died of yellow fever in San Domingo in 1797. I do not know if any of the Fowle or Lloyd family members apportioned any blame to Lord Craven for what had happened to their family member. It seems the relationship with the Earl was not particularly close. In a letter to Cassandra of January 1801, her sister, Jane Austen, wrote, "Eliza has seen Lord Craven at Barton, and probably by this time at Kintbury, where he was expected for one day this week. She found his manners very pleasing indeed. The little flaw of having a mistress now living with him at Ashdown Park seems to be the only unpleasing circumstance about him." Lord Craven's living arrangements seem to have been largely accepted. Perhaps there was an understanding that members of certain orders of society had a more relaxed moral code. After all, members of the royal family were well known to keep mistresses. So, who was Lord Craven's mistress? She was Harriet Wilson, 15 years younger than Craven himself, and the daughter of a shopkeeper born in London early in 1786. This would mean she was not quite, or only just 15 when Jane Austen wrote to Cassandra in January 1801. However, Harriet's age would not have raised eyebrows in the same way as it would today. The age of consent in England was only raised from 12 to 13 in 1875. Lydia Bennet, in Jane Austen's Pride and Prejudice, is 15 at the start of the book, and still only just 16 when she elopes with the scoundrel Wickham. Jane Austen, however, was not entirely comfortable with Lord Craven having his mistress living with him at Ashdown Park. It is an unpleasing circumstance. Harriet herself seems not to have found circumstances with the Earl to be particularly pleasing, as she eventually moved on to become the lover of various other gentlemen. One of her many relationships was with the Duke of Wellington, who, when Harriet threatened to reveal all in a memoir, famously replied, "Publish and be damned." Harriet did publish a memoir, however, and it's available from Amazon at £12 and 4p, opening the first chapter with the line, "I shall not say why and how I became, at the age of 15, the mistress of the Earl of Craven." Harriet's relationship with the Earl was not to last. 2 years after Eliza Fowle had met with her cousin at Barton Court, Harriet had moved on to a relationship with the 3rd Viscount Melbourne. Sometime in 1805, the Earl met and fell in love with Louisa Brunton, an actress specialising in Shakespearean roles at the fashionable Drury Lane Theatre. The daughter of a shopkeeper turned theatre manager, Louisa would have been perceived as coming from a level of society several rungs below that of Lord Craven. Furthermore, although Drury Lane was a fashionable theatre to attend, a career as an actress was still considered relatively low status. In 1807, the couple were married by special licence from the Archbishop of Canterbury at Craven's house in Charles Street, London, and the new countess gave up her career on the stage. By this time, Craven's military career had progressed. He had been made a Major General in 1805, and by 1825 was a General. In 1819, he had been made Lord Lieutenant of Berkshire. How much time he actually spent in the county, however, we do not know. What the ordinary villagers of Kimpbury, Hampstead Marshall, Inkpen, or Enbourne would have thought of their frequently absent Lord Lieutenant, it is, of course, impossible to know. But gossip regarding his very young mistress at Ashdown must have spread throughout the area, as would talk of his marriage to an actress. Perhaps those who came into contact with him, the many servants he would have employed at Ashdown or Hampstead Marshall, for example, would have found, like Eliza Fowle, his manners to be pleasing. But I think it is a very safe bet that the farmers, the yeomen, the working men and women of our area would all have had an opinion to share amongst themselves. William, Lord Craven, died in July 1825, aged 54. He was succeeded by his son William, 2nd Earl of Craven. Penny Fletcher adds, Christopher Hibbert writes that Harriet had a Swiss father. She was renowned not so much for her beauty as easy manners, gaiety, and flighty charm. Sir Walter Scott described her as smart, saucy, with the manners of a wild schoolboy. Harriet was a well-known lady in certain circles. When she grew too old to charm, she wrote her memoirs, sent the relevant passages to the gentleman concerned, and offered to suppress it for a fee. This caused the famous reply of Wellington, "Publish and be damned." Walbury Beacon Benefice contact details. Jenny Veazey, email jennyveazey@hotmail.com. Benefice Office 01635 226 064. Email wbboffice@gmail.com. Items for the Beacon to Phil on pji@crestednewtcomputing.co.uk.